can't be sitting here with no cat in the background. Good job. I love you so much. Hello, and welcome to Shit Show.
It just glitches.
This is as good as it's gonna get today, folks. This is our first video, so please bear with us. Okay. Anyways, we were really nervous to start this channel, and it took us a long time to decide if this was even a thing we were actually going to do. At this point, Moon Knight has been out for a while, and it was out for a number of months before we wanted anything to do with it because we knew what it was about. No, stay. Oh my god, please stay. Oh, good girl. Good job. Okay, I think we will have a cat. Okay. No! But we decided that since this series has become so popular in mainstream media that we needed to put our voice out there.
She's sitting where there's not a bed.
So my name is Smidge. I am the host of our system. We have been working on this project for a really long time. We've been putting so much effort into it. We saved up and we paid a couple $100s for this really nice camera, which I did not know they went for that much. And I say all this just to express to you what this means to us and what we want it to mean for other people. We really want this video to appeal to a wide audience because we feel this series has become prevalent in mainstream media. We need the voices of actual systems so that we know accurate information about D.I.D is just as prevalent as these portrayals in media. Now more than ever, D.I.D and OSDD awareness has a very strong presence on the internet, and unfortunately, it is continuing to put a damaging image of people who live with these disorders. So there is so much to be said about this series, and overall there were a lot of things that we were really impressed by. This is going to be a series. We're gonna have put out a couple of parts, probably 4 or 5 different videos. In the last one, we'll go over some of the things that we thought this series did well that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with D.I.D, but things that still deserve to be mentioned and talked about. But like the title says, we're going to deep dive into Moon Knight's D.I.D representation, what they did wrong, what they did right, and what good D.I.D representation actually looks like. We want to put a quick content warning here about some of the themes and discussion points that will be brought up throughout all of the videos. Themes include verbal, emotional, and physical abuse of a child, death, family relationships, specifically between a mother and a son. Many scenes take place in a psychiatric hospital where patients are sedated, restrained, and physically wrestled to the ground, and we are going to touch on a couple of those scenes. Not every video is going to cover all of these topics. Most of these themes are brought up in episode 5 of the series. Also, if you have trauma relating to any of those things that we've already mentioned or are sensitive to yelling and sudden loud noises, be very careful while watching this series if that's something that you choose to do, especially episode 5, like I mentioned. I would advise against watching the series if any of those themes are upsetting to you. Many of these scenes were very triggering for us, and we would not have continued watching it if we didn't need to be able to review it. If you have not watched the series yet, but you want to, stop, go watch it, and then come back, because spoilers all over the place. One last thing before we hop into it, neither me nor anybody else in my system are mental health professional of any kind. So everything that we're saying here is strictly our opinion, obviously. And we are also aware that every D.I.D system is different and has different experiences and opinions. We're not trying to speak for anybody else. We're just basing all of this on our own opinions and our own experiences and scientific findings regarding clinical D.I.D. Okay, now we're gonna get into it. This video will only be covering episode 1.
It's a doozy.
It's a doozy. The goldfish problem. Good job. When we first see our main man, Stephen Grant, he wakes up in his bed looking confused, and when he pulls the covers off of his bed, we see that he has put a restraint around his ankle and has tied himself to a post in the middle of his room. Now, I didn't think I had high expectations when I got into this. I tried to aim for the lower end of what I thought were realistic expectations, but when I saw this, I wanted to quit immediately and crawl back into my hole of monotonous but safe realm of existence. At this point, I looked over my partner who had her head in her hands, and I realized we were both gonna have to, you know, aim significantly lower with our expectations than we already were.
Yeah.
The reason he has tied himself to a pole in the middle of his room like a dog on a leash is because he thinks that he is a sleepwalker. It is certainly an unconventional solution to the problem that he thinks he has, but it's, I guess, not hurting anybody. The problem here is that there is an audience, and this is a fabricated visual in a world where everything is purposeful. It's in the details of what he is using. The restraint around his ankle was not some homemade contraption like what he used for the other parts of his anti-sleepwalking protection. It is a restraint you would see on a patient in a psychiatric hospital. This may not seem significant on the surface, but subconsciously your brain has taken that image and sorted it with information that you already associate with it. And in this case, I hate using the word crazy because I don't think that that is a word that should be used to describe somebody in any capacity. It's the word that we have been taught to associate. So what we associate with that image is crazy people that need to be restrained so they don't hurt themselves or other people. Did the director mean for us to make that particular association? It's hard to tell. But as someone who has worked in entertainment and has a degree in theater design, I know that every prop is purposeful and serves to tell a story without words. So right off the bat, this object or image is influencing us to believe that he is potentially dangerous. The restraint also strikes me as...
Oh, is that...
Ma'am? Alright. The restraint also strikes me as somewhat unrealistic. Rein themselves. Oh, isn't that the cutest? Pretty much anyone with D.I.D would never voluntarily restrain themselves.
Outside of kinky purposes.
Alright. The feeling of being trapped is oftentimes a huge trigger, and not a feeling that most people with trauma would impose onto themselves voluntarily. Of course, it depends on the system. Everybody is different, but to us, it just feels wrong. But moving on from that scene, which I could honestly write an entire script about on its own. Let's hop into scene 3. So this part is where we see him starting his day, being late to work, getting berated by his boss, and it was amazing and I loved it. It's so normal and expected and relatable. For a lot of people with D.I.D, to the outside world, we appear as any other person, and that's really the point of the disorder, is to be able to function and fly under the radar 99% of the time, because that is what helps us survive the trauma that created that disorder. In fact, most of the time, even the host is unaware that they even have this disorder, because it essentially has the brain keep secrets from itself. Without being super long-winded about it, I really did find this scene very, very relatable. Oftentimes in media, when we see a character who is suffering from any mental illness, they can be written in a way where their entire personality, no pun intended, is that disorder. We know that people are so much more complex than that, and whatever disorder a person may be struggling with, while it informs so much about who they are as a person, it is not everything that they are. With Steven, though, we see him in his element and we find out so much more about him. His passion for Egyptian culture and history. We get to see how he interacts with other people, whether that be patrons of the museum or his co-workers, and really see that he is this incredibly kind and sensitive person who is clearly lonely and a little bit down on his luck. Those traits help us bond with Steven and who he is as a character, as well as showing us a person we would want to be friends with. And there were absolutely moments within this scene that were incredibly relatable as far as living with D.I.D. One of those moments is when he is made aware of a date he has with one of his coworkers, but he doesn't remember asking her out, but instead of stopping her and being like, whoa, wait a minute, he just goes with it until a little bit later when he is like, oh, I really don't remember that moment. I found this incredibly relatable because stuff like that really does happen. In fact, when I was in college, I had I mean, countless times of having people come up to me and start talking as clearly they know me, but I have no recollection of ever meeting them. I don't know their name, like nothing. Or inside jokes with friends that I do have, but clearly there was a situation or some conversation that I was not a part of, as well as not having any memories from vacations or big life events where there are photos, clearly you were there, but again, there's just no recollection of it. And you just have to take those things in stride and go along with, oh yeah, like that was a great time. And you know, you really don't have much to go on there, but you have to go with it. And clearly this is a situation that Steven is finding himself in here. There are a couple of other moments where he's called by the wrong name. He doesn't get overly worried about it. He just shakes it off as something he forgot. And that is just what systems do, especially when they're not aware.
I started recording while she was scratching.
Hi, guess whose footage got corrupted? In lieu of my ugly mug, here's some kitties. Ooh, is you being good, honey? Is it so cool? Ow! We see him wake up in a field outside of a village he doesn't know, beat up and bloody. He gets up and is trying to get his bearings when he is seen by a couple of men who start shooting at him. So he starts running but is confused and doesn't know where he is going or what he should do, and he hears two distinct voices inside of his head arguing and telling him what to do. It's unclear if he's ever really heard these voices before, but this is definitely the first time he's heard them and recognized them as not part of his inner monologue. This is a really important moment in the life of a system. This moment when you realize something about you is really, really different, and it can be terrifying. So yes, this could be accurate for some systems, being able to hear one another. The part where they are arguing with each other and where we see Steven talking out loud to them instead of thinking at them, if that makes sense. Sometimes it can be really difficult to relay a message to someone on the inside through internal communication. So if they are close enough to the front to hear your voice when you're speaking out loud, it can just be easier to talk out loud. The first voice that chimes in is the voice of Khonshu. At this point in the story, we don't know who Khonshu is yet, but we know by the way that he's talking to Steven that he's really not a fan of Steven. He's very condescending, calling him an idiot, and clearly just not wanting to deal with him at all. I thought this was a pretty good depiction of a persecutor. If you don't know what a persecutor is, they are a type of alter that is prone to unhealthy coping mechanisms. And these coping mechanisms can often result in mistreating, manipulating, and trying to control other individuals in the system in an effort to control the system's outside behavior to achieve the ultimate goal of survival and trying to make the abuse stop. In this case, Khonshu is trying to bully Steven into giving up control of the front to Mark, because having Mark front is giving them the best chance of survival. So Steven runs into the village, and the men that are after him lose him in a crowd of people. But pretty quickly, Steven realizes that this is not a normal crowd of people, and in comes our villain. And things turn pretty culty pretty quickly. Our villain, Harrow, not Pharaoh. Harrow notices Steven and is like, I know you. And Steven is like, no, you don't know me. And Harrow is like, yes, I do. Now give back the thing. And Steven is like, oh yeah, the thing. Totally. Take the thing back. It's a scarab, but not any scarab. It's a super special scarab. Sit down.
Your hair takes up 90% of it.
Sorry.
Goodbye, Lucy.
Oh, look at them babies. You better not lick my straw. This wig is cute as but itchy as
So my battery died and now it's October. We're just gonna pick up where we left off. So of course, to get out of the situation, Steven is like, yes, here's the scarab, please take it and let me go home. Steven tries to hand the scarab over to Harrow, except he is no longer in control of his own arms. And because it's Marvel, it becomes like a whole slapstick thing, which honestly was funny, even if it wasn't realistic. So essentially what is happening in this scene is that Mark, Steven's alter, is trying to keep Steven from giving over the scarab. And how they depicted this is not a real thing that happens. As far as I know, you can be in a state of co-consciousness where it is hard to tell who is fronting and who exactly is controlling the body. I have personally had moments of just doing a mundane task and it's hard to tell exactly who is controlling the body and who is taking a back seat, but still aware of everything that's happening until your body does something that you didn't tell it to do. In those cases, at least for us, whoever is actually fronting has control of the entire body and can be influential as to what the body is doing, but technically only one of us has control. Do not slap her. Wow.
Did you slap her?
Yes. But of course how they did it in this scene was very exaggerated slapstick, and it was funny. I enjoyed it. And what happens next is what I hated most in this series, or at least it's in my top 3.
Good chirping.
Oh, good chirpy chirpies. Is you a burb? Is you chirping? Ooh. Look at my daughter.
She's not chirping as much as she is derping.
Oh. Okay, bye. I understand that this is a superhero series and that there is going to be a certain amount of violence and it's superheroes. We're all okay with that. We all expected that. The problem, for us at least, is how they depicted it. We start getting these jarring flash cuts where Steven blacks out, and when he comes to, he has done increasingly more violent things. And it's very, dare I say, Split-esque. For example, he comes to, and the men who had grabbed him are suddenly laying dead in a circle all around him, and there is literal blood on his hands, and he's freaking out. Oh, I swear to God, pets are the best grounding tool ever. She's got an underbite, so when she looks up, she's got like a little gap. There she goes. Okay. So he's freaking out because he has no memory of hurting them, and he's frantically apologizing, and he blacks out again. And then suddenly he's driving a truck, one hand on the steering wheel, a pistol in the other hand. And again, we hear the alters voices arguing, telling Steven what to do, and generally trying to bully him into giving up control of the front. So Steven blacks out again. When he comes back, he realizes there is another guy in the truck. Blacks out, comes back, guy is dead. It keeps going on like this for a while. Let's break this down a little bit. First thing, the rapid switching. I'm not gonna get into the nitty-gritty of it. First of all, rapid switching is a thing. It's exactly what it sounds like. A rotating door of alters coming out for a few minutes or even just like a moment, and then somebody else switches out. And usually rapid switching is a response to something that is incredibly overwhelming, usually something not good. That is not the case 100% of the time. Sometimes it just happens. I will give it that maybe rapid switching makes sense, and we know that Steven is freaking out. He plummeted head first into deep waters of mental breakdown, and Mark is desperately trying to take and keep control of the front in order to make sure that they all survive this. But because Steven is aware, he's pushing back on Mark, and that is a real thing. You can resist switches, and it is literally a headache. Like, it literally causes horrible migraines if I'm, trying that hard to resist a switch. So this battle for power can cause rapid switching. But in a scenario where this maybe doesn't make sense is because Steven is so out of his element and way over his head in this situation. He, does not have control over his switches. Systems do not have control over the switches. So Steven is way over his head, and because of the
She's bonking
she's rubbing up against the tripod. You have everything else to rub your pooches on. Oh my god.
up against the other leg.
Ah!
Stop.
All right.
No, stop.
And because of the don't you dare. Oh, this is my tonker. All right, you are dismissed. Swear to God.
Stop.
Drama.
Drama queen.
Okay. Anyways.
Hannah?
Gabby Hanna. So Steven is super new to this. They are in physical danger. Steven is not mentally able to handle this right now. At least that is what we have been led to believe by the story thus far. So, okay. I'm gonna get on my soapbox.
Isn't that kind of what the channel
That's
is?
So, if I were the director, I'm allowed to talk about these things because I have a degree in it. How I would have done it. It's one of those situations where we could sit here and talk about a million hypotheticals. There is no right way for a system to behave. Maybe it rubbed me the wrong way because this is not my experience of D.I.D, but please comment your own experiences because hell yeah, brother. We'll revisit that. If I were the director, how I would have done this is to take that scene that we saw earlier when Steven woke up in the field and he was fronting, he had control of the body, but he was able to hear Mark and Khonshu talking about him and to him. Steven is now becoming aware of his condition, and so because of that connection, we know now that they are starting to create that headspace where they're able to communicate. So how I wish they had done this was to have that scene, but in reverse, where now we have Mark fronting and controlling the body and is control of the situation, but Steven is now maybe allowed to be aware of some of what is going on. From what I have heard and from my experience of it, most of the time, not all, most of the time, when you are rapid switching, you are so dissociated. It feels like nothing is real because it's happening so fast. Your brain doesn't really have time to get traction and to be grounded because you're there for a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes before somebody is rotated in. From my understanding and from what I have heard, that seems to be the general consensus. Jingle jangle, do not scratch on the couch! Go from being so cute to being, oh my god, stop. So Steven blacks out again and he comes back and oh my god, it was just a dream! Everything's fine. His ankle restraint is on. He's all huddled up in his bed. It's all good. Psych. No, it wasn't. And here's how we find out. Steven gets up and goes about his day as normal, except this time he starts noticing things that he has never noticed. Can you not? Namely, he has a goldfish who has one fin, but this time he looks closer and bada bang, bada boom, this fishy's got two fins. Flip, flip. So he takes the fish to the pet shop to see, which, first of all, why are you taking your fish to the pet shop? Like, just like go and ask a good question. And it's like, is this a thing that fish can do? And the clerk tells him, what are you talking about? You came in yesterday and bought that fish. And it had two fins, and it still has two fins. Which begs the question, what happened to the other fish? Mark, we're looking at you.
Wanted some sushi.
And then he realizes that it is actually the afternoon, not the morning like he thought it was. So he panics again, this poor boy, and gets his little behind to the restaurant because he's got a date and is waiting and waiting and waiting, and she is not showing up. So he calls her and she answers the phone really upset and tells him that he stood her up 2 days ago. This is when he realizes that today is Sunday, not Friday. This is one of the staples of D.I.D, is amnesia and losing time. And this is a really real thing, and it is really difficult to deal with. My experience as the host of our system, before I was aware that I had D.I.D, sometimes it was easy to dismiss that I was losing time because it kind of happens throughout the day and you're forgetting mundane things that most people probably wouldn't remember anyways. But sometimes like this, you miss out on really important events in your life, and that's rough. Like, I've missed out on events like entire family vacations. Sorry. Woo! When you think about it too much. School events I was really looking forward to, and plans that I made with friends. Sometimes you don't remember these events because another alter was fronting while your body was there, and so that amnesia wall prevents you from remembering any of it. But sometimes you miss out on these events because maybe you make the plans, but somebody else is out that day and he doesn't know that you made those plans, and then that creates situations like this where you stand up friends or dates, and it can cause a lot of strain in relationships. For a lot of people, us included, it has caused us to lose friends completely. You know, if you're not aware of what is going on, at least for myself, I became convinced that I was a bad friend, and I put myself in this position of always being the bad guy because I was the source of the problems in the friendship. You begin to adopt this mentality. The thing is that you're not. Oftentimes, as victims of abuse, when you're in abusive relationships, you are accustomed to being manipulated into believing the worst about yourself. So if this has happened to you, please know that you are not the bad guy. You just have a condition that needs a lot of time and practice to be able to function with your system. When things like this happen, it is not because you are a bad person or a bad friend or a bad child. You're not a bad whatever, fill in the blank. So please do not blame yourself. And you will learn how to bring other healthy people into your support network. And when you have truly supportive friends and maybe family, if they are truly good and healthy, they will not treat you like the bad guy because you're not.
That was really good.
All right, moving on.
Mooning on.
Moving on. But the other scary part of this is, again, from my own experience, especially when I was in college, there were a handful of times where I'd be hanging out with friends who would be talking about a get-together that happened over the weekend, and I would ask them about it because I didn't remember them bringing it up, and they would tell me that I was there, and that was really embarrassing. I legitimately thought I was losing my mind, and I didn't talk to anybody about it because I was scared and I didn't want other people to know that I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, this really can be one of the hardest parts about living with DID, is feeling like you are missing out on parts of your life and that you have to share this one life you have with your entire system. We are now nearing the end of the episode. Steven is at work and Harrow has tracked him down.
Hero?
And what essentially happens is Harrow doesn't do anything, but he threatens Steven. I don't know, it wasn't that exciting. And later that night, Steven is still working after the museum is closed for the night, and he seems to be having another hallucination, but it turns out that it is a mythical creature called a jackal, which is essentially like a big-ass dog from Egyptian mythology. And this jackal is sent after him by Harrow. To get away, he locks himself in the bathroom. And as he's standing in there, we hear Mark's voice again. And this time we see him in Steven's reflection in the mirror on the wall. At first I was not a fan of this, but now I like it. Obviously, on the outside, we can't actually see each other by looking in the mirror. They did this is just how they chose to visually represent this connection with Mark and Steven. The only way that alters are able to see each other would be in the headspace or in the inner world, but we're not really gonna get into that right now. If you don't know what an inner world is, just hang on. We're gonna talk about it in way more detail when we cover episode 5, I believe. But Spark Notes version, an inner world is a type of headspace where alters exist when they are not fronting. Not all systems have inner worlds, and not all system hosts have access to the inner world. I, for example, do not currently have access to our inner world. But because of the way that my system works, I can sometimes kind of see in my mind's eye an alter who is close to the front in kind of that fronting headspace. But back to Mark and Steven. This is the first time Mark and Steven have communicated directly. And understandably, Steven is really worked up about it, and he is desperately trying to tell himself that he is not crazy. And wow, I felt that. I won't get into it again because we've talked about it a lot, but I felt that. There are two important things that happen in this short conversation that I want to point out. The first is how Steven reacts to what is going on. He's afraid, he's confused, and he feels like he's losing his mind. As the host of a system, I really connected with this. I remember when I first became aware of my system, I was in denial for a really, really long time, even after I got my diagnosis and knew for sure that this was real. And again, that is another one of the hallmarks of this disorder is the denial bit, because you are not supposed to know that you have this disorder. So when you become aware of it, you are naturally going to deny.
Denial. It kind of goes with the theme.
Anyways, yeah, denial. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that Mark does know that he is part of a system, and he does understand what's going on. This, again, is normal for alters who are not the host to know that they are part of a system, and sometimes don't even experience amnesia the same way that the host does. Oftentimes with D.I.D, the host will have experiences of complete amnesia, of blocking out sometimes years of time. But other alters who are aware that they are part of a system will experience amnesia, but not as often and not as complete as the host will experience. So they will often have knowledge of things that the host has no knowledge of at all. So Mark is able to calm Steven down enough to let Mark front so that he is able to protect them from the jackal that is coming to tear them into little bits and pieces. And we can see this is really different from the earlier scene we saw when Steven was fighting so hard for control and was not gonna give it up for anything. So which is it? Are switches easy and smooth like that? Or are they really rough and choppy and terrifying like we saw earlier? The answer is yes. So the answer is yes and. So is Steven able to control these switches or not? The truth is that it is way more complicated than that. Not only do switches look really different from system to system, within one system, your switches are gonna look really different depending on the situation, depending on the alters. There's so many factors. But what is true for all systems is that we are not able to control them. The exception to this would be with a system who has really good communication and has been working with each other for a long time, and you are able to plan switches in certain situations, but this can take years or even decades of practice, essentially. But when it comes to triggers, you can't control that. Like, if you're gonna switch, you're gonna switch. Steven wasn't really aware of Mark. And when a host is unaware of their alters, it can be easier for an alter to front in some cases because the host isn't consciously repressing that switch. That's why this scene in the museum bathroom is so drastically different from the escape scene. This time, Steven is not just aware of Mark, he is afraid to let somebody else take control of his body because he's afraid that he's not going to get control back. Therefore, he is now doing his best to suppress Mark from doing so until he hears the jackal coming, is triggered, and Mark is instantaneously able to take control. And this moment of Steven being really upset and angry and not wanting to give up control was another moment that I really strongly connected to. To say I was upset about my diagnosis is an understatement. I was angry, I was confused, I was crying all the time. But more than any of that, I was incredibly afraid. I was afraid of losing control of my own body in a way I never even imagined was possible. So whenever I was aware of another alter getting close, or if I myself was feeling really dissociated and switchy, I did everything in my power to suppress them and block them from fronting. And that whole experience is incredibly distressing, and it is a constant state of fight or flight, and I was getting horrible migraines from all of this, and I was barely even sleeping. All because I was afraid that if I let my guard down for just a second, somebody else would front and I would never have control again. People with DID do not automatically trust their alters. Trust between alters is something that needs to be cultivated and worked on, just like any other relationship.
But that is all we have for episode 1. Thank you so much for checking us out. We really hope you enjoyed it. We will be putting out more videos for each episode, so subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to know when that next video comes out. And of course, we would love to hear from you in the comments. Let us know what you thought, and if you're a System 2, we would love to know what you agreed with and what you experienced differently. We better see you back here for our next video. We'll be real sad if you don't. Take care of yourself and play nice with the other kids. See ya.